Engine installation. Today, my wife actually expressed some interest in trying to help me, so um, we actually tried to tackle the engine install together. Thankfully, that trial run I did the other day with my friend Alex ended up being extremely helpful. The install with my wife actually went very smooth. We only took basically one try, and we were able to get the engine and transmission installed and loosely bolted in the right spot. Yeah, it went very smooth. It only took about an hour and a half from when we started to when everything was loosely bolted in, and then the I spent another hour torquing and bolting everything to spec. Um, the one issue, oh, so from last week, I actually ended up resolving the transmission bolt issue by getting a longer bolt. I got a 10 millimeter with 1.5 thread pitch, and I got it in 70 millimeter length. The longer bolt actually ends up catching the threads further in the hole, and I was able to torque it to spec. So that worked out well. Um, and so when we installed the engine, I also got 30 millimeter long um, bolts for the engine mount bracket. I used my calipers and measured that the hole in the engine was 30 millimeters. And the bracket plate was not 5 millimeters thick. And so I ended up just getting 30 millimeter um, bolts. However, I had not accounted for the thickness of the two washers that also go on that bolt. And so I think I could probably size up to the 35 millimeter length bolts. Probably the 40 millimeters are still a little bit too long, but I'm not sure how important it is for going the 35 millimeter deep. The engine is pretty important, so probably better safe than sorry. So I may just replace those in the next few days with slightly longer bolts. So I didn't torque those to spec today. But the rest I did. Uh, so one thing you should pay attention to when mounting the transmission is that you have to sort of cut the heat shielding a little bit inside the chassis in order to put the nylock nut onto the bolt. There are four of them, and they're kind of hidden and a little bit tricky to get on, but that's one thing you have to pay attention to. And finally, the torque specs I ended up using today were for the transmission plate to the chassis, 20 Newton meters. The transmission plate to the transmission, 40 Newton meters. The engine mount to the chassis, 20 Newton meters. The engine bracket to the engine mount, 41 Newton meters. And then the engine bracket to the engine, the spec I saw was 34 Newton meters. However, my friend got specs from our dealer, Rich, and the three slightly different torque specs we got from him are that the transmission plate to the transmission should be about 68 Newton meters. The engine bracket to the engine mount should also be about 68 Newton meters. And then finally, the engine bracket to the engine should be about 47 Newton meters. So I will have to go back and retorque those and then actually torque the engine bracket to engine bolts to spec once I get the longer bolts. And I was actually also missing the spring washers for those. So once I get those on as well, I will have to torque it. But that's it.